Social Democrats. Holly Cairns, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks, Minister, for this session in response to alarming increases in domestic abuse and gender-based violence. Safe Ireland have rightly called it the shadow pandemic. During the first 6 months of COVID, there was a massive increase in people fleeing domestic violence. 3,450 women and 589 children contacted domestic violence services for the first time ever. The impact is being felt across the country. West Cork Women Against Domestic Violence saw a 35% increase in calls. And we knew this was coming. Advocates and support organisations warned us and sought emergency measures and additional funding months ago. I acknowledge the initiatives taken by government, including some additional funding, the access to rent supplement for victims of domestic violence. However, more must be done. The government needs to ensure additional capacity for the duration of the pandemic. I think it's important to note that issues around refuge spaces wouldn't be as much of a problem if Ireland lived up to our commitments under the Istanbul Convention. This requires us to provide one refuge space for every 10,000 people in Ireland. Unlike every other European country, we only provide one refuge space per 10,000 women. Needless to say, this means we provide 50% less refuge spaces than what's required. Is it any wonder we're in a situation now where we don't have enough spaces, and this has to change, Minister? Clear infrastructure is necessary. Responsibility for this area is spread across several departments, which leads to confusion and abdication of responsibility. The support organisations, the experts in the area, are looking for one minister who leads the government response. Intersectional issues are relevant here too. Regrettably, older women, women and girls with disabilities, and those from migrant and ethnic minorities are more vulnerable. Speaking at a Disability Matters Committee meeting last week, Dr. Rosaleen McDonough highlighted the importance of intersectionality and Ireland's appalling record and relationship with disabled people. Migrant or undocumented women and girls are also at increased risk due to the government policy. For example, issues around translation in our state services are a barrier. People are reluctant to approach Gardaí for fear of subsequent deportation. We need firewalls between state services and immigration services. Women, girls and other vulnerable populations need to be assured that they can safely seek medical help, access social welfare and approach the police without any fear of subsequent punitive action by the state. We need an acceleration of the programme for government commitment to regularising the status of undocumented people. Policy choices by this and previous governments are making more people vulnerable, and you can change that. Finally, Minister, this week there has been issues around more and very serious issues around image-based crimes and so-called revenge porn. There are online folders with thousands of images that have been taken and shared without consent. This primarily affects young women, and some of them are underage. I'd like to send a clear message to anyone whose images have been shared without your consent. It is not your fault, you didn't do anything wrong, and you're not to blame. However, unfortunately, despite warnings about situations like this one, image-based sexual abuse is still not a crime here. So these violations of women have been facilitated by the state's inadequate policy and inaction. There is legislation before the Justice Committee on this that needs to be accelerated now. And I welcome what you said about doing it in the next year, but it's not soon enough. It has to happen now. This House must be clear. Consent has to be at the heart of this. Where consent is not present, the law must step in. Currently, there are incredible activists and support groups working on the issue to help victims. Minister, you need to assure them today that this government has their back. This House can move quickly, not before the end of the year, now. We saw this yesterday in relation to Dublin Zoo. We've seen it in the past in relation to the banks. I'm asking you to move immediately to protect victims of what we all know is a crime, but today is still not considered one. Minister, I'm glad it's you that I'm speaking to in relation to this. I admire the work you've been doing in relation to rape trials, and I'm asking you to please, please, please take action on this now. We will all support you. I think we all will. As a nation, we also need to have an incredibly serious and difficult conversation about this and other related issues. Thousands of Irish men are sharing images of women and girls without their consent. There are horrific levels of sexual violence in our colleges. We all know victims of domestic abuse, rape or sexual assault, and this shouldn't be the norm. It's International Men's Day today, so I'd like to ask all men, If you see or receive an image being circulated without consent, call it out. You can and should speak up in WhatsApp groups, in conversation, and in any given situation, call it out. When you don't, you're complicit and you're supporting a culture that facilitates gender-based abuse, and we need zero tolerance. To achieve that, we need you.
Thank you, Deputy.
Sorry.
Thank you, Deputy. Moving back to the Government Deputy Murnane O'Connor, 8 minutes.
Thank you.